Welcome back to the Period Panel, proudly supported by Active Iron. Hello and welcome to the Period Panel. I am delighted to be joined by Meave Mannion on today's episode. Maeve, it's great to have you. Thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks very much for having me.
I suppose, first things first, I would love you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So currently I'm a PhD student in SCTU Carlow. I'm researching the menstrual cycle in weight-categorised sports. And I suppose how this came to fruition was I did my undergraduate degree in strength and conditioning. From there, I suppose, like playing sports myself and growing up in like quite a sporty, even though I don't really like the word environment, that led me to have like a big interest in the menstrual cycle, weight class sports. And I suppose that led me to the research that I'm doing today.
And I suppose give us a bit of an insight into your sporting background as well. I know you're still competing at the moment, so talk to us a little bit about that.
So I actually powerlift competitively. I have a lovely crew of people down in Urban Barbell in Limerick, and that's where I'd be predominantly based for training. I suppose growing up, I actually played basketball and rugby, and I suppose for me, how I became really interested in like female athletes was like as a rugby player at like a fairly all right level. I kind of noticed the lack of resources, lack of information that was available to us as athletes. So I suppose for me, I thought, okay, well, I'm noticing this problem. So in order to solve the problem, I have to do an undergraduate degree in strength and conditioning. And then I was like so fortunate that I ended up doing a graduate internship in the physiology lab in the college, which allowed me to then work with like multiple athletes across multiple levels and multiple sports. So I come from both like a personal background of lifting and then like quite a professional background in that I've worked with lots of athletes from lots of sports so far.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we've come across a lot and, talk about at our sport is the fact that there is this lack of information available for women, as well as like then obviously leading into female athletes, and that a lot of research has been done on men and kind of applied to women. So tell us a little bit more about the PhD and exactly what you'd be diving into. I know you've just over a year done. I suppose explain to the general public how it all works, because a PhD isn't something that a lot of people take on.
No, and I suppose for me it was like both personal and professional in the sense that like I noticed this problem and I wanted answers for myself.
Yeah.
And that led to me obviously wanting answers for everyone else. So I suppose like as you've shared yourself on social media, Paris 2024 is set to be like the most sex balanced games to date. Like there'll be an equal participation of males and females, but like if you look at the research in sport and exercise science, a study was done in like 2014 that only 4 to 13% of all of the sport and exercise research is done on a female only cohort. So like we have come a long way even since 2014 in the sense that there's much more research done on female athletes now. We're considering the menstrual cycle, we're considering like pregnancy, hormonal contraceptives, but we're definitely at a stage where the quality of the research needs to be a little bit more robust so that we can actually apply it. So like, I'm not the first one to notice this trend. Like there's been fantastic researchers so far in the sense of like Kirsty Elliott-Sale, Kelly McNulty, David Nolan. Like these fantastic researchers have like, I suppose in the early stages helped us identify what the gaps are and where we need to go. And especially like Kelly McNulty would be a big one for me in the sense that like I've really, really driven home like the quality of my research and how everything needs to be standardized across the board as best as we can so that we can actually apply the findings. Because that was a big thing for me, was that everyone was saying, okay, there's no research done on females, but it's like, okay, there actually is, but we can't actually apply it. So we're no further on essentially in that sense. So that kind of was the driving force behind the research for me.
So in terms of the research that you're looking to do, it's primarily based on the menstrual cycle in weight categorised sports, and it'll be a 4-year PhD program.
Yeah. So a 4-year PhD program. The first year was mainly based on I was given a completely different title. I was actually supposed to look at the effects of the menstrual cycle and body composition on performance and perceived performance in elite female athletes.
Okay.
So I kind of tore up the plan in my first year, and kind of had to justify why I wanted to go down this route. So I suppose, like, for people who don't know, in terms of like weight categorized sports, we have this extra added pressure of you have to be a specific weight on a specific day, or else you're actually not allowed to compete.
Yeah.
So when you tie that in with the menstrual cycle and the different like physiological variables that occur over the course of the menstrual cycle, it's like that's a big gap in itself. And it was almost like too good to be true for me. I was like, how has nobody noticed this? And I suppose, like, if you're not a weight class athlete,
You don't think about it.
you don't think about this. Like, you don't step up on the scales in the morning, in the evening, like the week prior to your competition, to make sure that, you know, you're going to actually be allowed to compete on a Saturday.
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. I would have spoken to Claire Lamb. She would have gone to the Rio Olympics in 2016 and would have raced in the lightweight double. She's the sister of Emer Lamb, so Emer would actually race in the open weight category, wouldn't have to worry about making weight, where Claire would have raced in the lightweight event. And she's a tall athlete as well, and would have talked to her about, you know, trying to make that weight class, and the average of the boat would be 57 kilos. I think she's about 5'10", so but in terms of that, she would have talked to me a little bit about you know, trying to make weight and having to get such a good understanding of your menstrual cycle and how it can impact you, because obviously, you know, some people you know, might carry more weight around their period or at different stages of their menstrual cycle. I suppose with a sport like rowing, you weigh in on the morning of the event. I know with some other weight categorized sports that you can weigh in the day before. I suppose talk to us a little bit about that in terms of the variances that you might be looking at across the, like you said, you're looking at 11 sports. So I'm imagining that the rules and regulations around the different sports are different as well.
Like, it's completely different depending on the federation that you're involved with, like depending on who your governing body is, depending on a few depending again, like where you're competing. So what I basically had to do was go through all of the research and for every sport kind of outline, okay, for the likes of powerlifting, there's X amount of federations, and more specifically the one that I compete in, I have a 2-hour weigh-in.
Okay.
So I know that I don't really have a lot of time afterwards to refuel, to recover, and I suppose haven't got as like big a weight range to play with. Whereas I've also done competitions where I've had 24 hours to weigh in. So like I've looked at more acute strategies, I suppose, to manipulate my weight. So like I've done water loading and water cutting, trips to the sauna, loads of things that like I wouldn't recommend. But things that got the job done in order to make the weight, because I had 24 hours to recover.
I guess people would be familiar with that in, you know, in professional boxing, where people would be weighing in the day before, and they, you know, they're weighing in at, you know, say 70 kilos, and then the next day when they're actually fighting, they could be 75 or 77 or 78 kilos, depending.
But some sports even have like a cap. So I think it's the likes of judo. So like the morning of the competition, they'll re-weigh you. So you can't have gained like more than 5%, like, which, you know, in combat sports, like I actually do kind of agree with that, and I get the logic behind that. So that was something that I didn't know. Was like the times of weigh-ins, how they vary, and I suppose like bringing it back to your menstrual cycle, like if you have a 2-hour weigh-in and you know that at a certain phase of your cycle you're likely to be a little bit heavier, a little, even the other way, a little bit lighter, because we tend to always focus on the heavier side of the weight class sports, but then you've females who are trying to bulk into a heavier weight class.
Of course.
Which we never really tend to touch on. So like depending on where you are in your cycle, and again, like it's highly individualized, that has to be considered when you're weighing in case you might be slightly heavier, you might be slightly lighter. So it's kind of something you might not necessarily consider if you're not a weight class athlete.
Yeah. And I suppose in terms of the research that you've done so far, and the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, like, you know, where are you now and where are you hoping to go?
So like I said, the first year was very much like tear up the plan and start again. I'm sure my supervisors did not enjoy that process, but like for me, I was hell-bent on finding some answers down this particular avenue. So I suppose like what we're always encouraged to do as PhD students is to like paint a picture. So like your start, your middle and your ending. So you're telling a story essentially. So for me, the start was, okay, well, I have no idea what's going on in terms of the menstrual cycle and weight class sports. I've no idea in terms of the trends. I've no idea on what the current research is. Like it's a completely blank canvas. So the first step for me was I did a narrative review. So essentially what that was, I was basically summarizing all of the research that's available to me currently on the menstrual cycle and weight class sports. So I took a combination of like the menstrual cycle, menstruation, phrased it like loads of different ways and paired that with weight class sports, again phrased that in loads of different ways to suit all of the sports and more importantly females, and basically plugged all of that into 6 different databases and ended up with, I think it was 71 papers, and out of the 71 papers I was able to use 11 of them.
Wow.
So to me, like there was 11 studies based off my search terms that I could use and I could pull data from to guide the direction that I was going in. So initially I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm so shocked. How am I going to like phrase a PhD around this? But then also when you put it that way, it's like there's such a big avenue.
Opportunity.
Yeah, to go here. So I suppose like my main findings from that particular study, not every weight class sport, so the kind of 11 of them that I am focusing on was included because there simply just wasn't research.
Yeah.
So like the main ones were like powerlifting, judo, rowing, karate, taekwondo, and boxing and wrestling. They were kind of the main sports. Like rowing and judo were the 2 most popular. There was like 4 and 3 studies for both of them. Like I suppose it's not really a finding of my own, but again, like it comes back to that research quality. Like there was a lot of variation in, you know, how we conduct the research, even down to like different phrases. So some papers you'll see female athletes being labeled as eumenorrheic. Some will be naturally menstruating. So like to someone reading that, they might mean the same thing, but to like a researcher, they're completely different. So like to me, like, well, not to me, but like naturally menstruating, say, is defined as someone who has a menstrual cycle who essentially bleeds for 3 to 5 days of the month. But I suppose the difference between eumenorrheic and naturally menstruating is with eumenorrheic, you're actually confirming that they're ovulating through like the use of a urine sample or a blood sample. So like if you haven't confirmed ovulation, there's a big difference between someone who's naturally menstruating and eumenorrheic. And oftentimes you'll see papers, you know, might have them labelled as eumenorrheic because they have a menstrual cycle, but they might not have confirmed ovulation. So like that's, I suppose, to me, I'll constantly harp on about, oh, the quality. Yeah. And I suppose to everyone else, that's what I mean by the quality, in the sense that like definitions will differ from paper to paper. So that was like the biggest thing for me. So going forward then I thought, okay, well, what do I need to find out about next? So hopefully the next study, which will take place after Christmas, so January 2024, will look at naturally menstruating females. So because I'm doing a survey, I'm not actually confirming that they're ovulating, I'm just confirming, or they're like self-confirming to me that they bleed for 3 to 5 days of a cycle. So I'm actually going to look at symptomology first, in order to like get a picture of, okay, what's going on. And symptomology is one of, like, not one of the only things, but it's something that we can look at without confirming, say, ovulation. So then like next I might do a tracking study where I'm confirming ovulation and I'm looking at different trends. So like we're kind of coming to, I suppose, this hypothesis that in weight class sports, you know, there are studies to say that like female boxers would be more susceptible to infrequent menstruation due to weight restriction, say compared to just your average recreational female with an average fat mass. So I suppose like we still have no idea, you know, to me or you, an average menstrual cycle is 28 days. We ovulate in the middle of it, like it's what we learned in Leaving Cert Biology, say. But for weight class sports where you have that added pressure of your body weight has to be this specific weight at this time, we've no idea, okay, is that affecting the length of our menstrual cycle? So is it going from like a 5-day cycle to a 6-day cycle, or sorry, 5-day bleed to a 6-day bleed? Or is like my menstrual cycle, what was normally to me, say 28 days, is that now 35? So we've no real picture per se as to what a typical menstrual cycle trend looks like in weight class sports.
So in relation, I suppose, to the research, are you trying to establish how competing in these sports impacts like performance and one's body, I suppose, now in their like current life, or will you be looking potentially at the impact that it could have on them in the future as well?
So like for me, I was always very conscious when I was starting into this that I was like, I don't want to like eliminate any cohort, don't want to leave anything out. But like unfortunately you're only given 4 years and 4 years funding. So potentially like I'll very much pave the way and lay the ground for this is what's currently happening. And I can probably give you a little bit of insight on this is where it might go. But it'll be very much up to someone, I suppose, to come in after me.
And take over the reins.
And I suppose that's how it has like happened through female athlete research, in the sense that like we've gotten as far as, okay, we have research, but it's not fantastic quality. And now like I'm coming in and I'm like, okay, how do we make the quality better and identify more gaps? And someone will come in after me and eventually be able to, I think it's something we need to move away from, in that we'll never be able to give blanket recommendations because it's like such a highly individualized process. But I do think like we owe our female athletes a little bit more than what we're currently giving them. So
yeah, it'd be really interesting, I suppose, to gain an understanding from people, like for people that are participating in those weight class sports, because obviously there's high performance level, but people are competing at those in weight class sports from club level, we'll say as well. But I suppose for people to understand like what are the implications potentially in later life, does it have an impact on, you know, your menstrual cycle for the rest of your life? Does it have anything to do with fertility or not? And answer all these questions that we simply don't have the answers to. So it would be brilliant, obviously, to see that research hopefully continued. I suppose in relation to menstrual cycle and maybe from some of the research that you've done or from some personal experience, how beneficial is it to both the athlete and the coach to have an insight and understanding of their menstrual cycle?
I suppose like I'd rephrase that slightly in the sense that like, you know, it's crucial. Like to me, it's just as important as a nutrition protocol, a sleep protocol, a training protocol. Like it's, I suppose, cyclical in terms of females go through this every 28 to 35 days, even 23 to 35 days, depending on your cycle length. So it's not something that we can, I suppose, brush over. Like everyone is highly individualized. It will, I suppose, affect people individually on different levels. So in order to, I suppose, know how it's potentially going to affect your athlete as a coach, and then you as an athlete, how it might affect you, I suppose it's your job as an athlete, I suppose, to go away and track your cycle and track your trends and know, okay, at this particular phase of my cycle, I might be a little bit more lethargic, I might be a little bit more moody, which in turn can play into my performance. But it's your coach's job, I suppose, to have your best interests at heart and to be able to have that conversation with them. So there needs to be like an open flow communication between the athlete and coach in terms of menstrual cycle, which I do think like we are a lot better at that now than what we were. But like in order to, I suppose, not have it limit performance, whether that be like your objectively measured performance or your perception of how you perform, both parties need to be fully aware of what's happening. Like I can come at it from an athlete perspective and a coach perspective, because I've worn both hats. So I suppose, like, as an athlete, as a coach, just because it's not happening directly to you doesn't mean you don't need to know about it.
Yeah, of course.
Like, we're so invested in like making athletes fitter, faster, stronger. That's just an element that adds to it, so we can't brush over it.
Yeah, definitely. Like, I suppose for anybody that's listening, like, it's about trying to gain an insight into the athlete and how to support them in like maximizing the most out of their training at certain stages. I suppose, have you gotten any insight into that around the different phases of someone's menstrual cycle that can be beneficial for specific types of training, or what is some of the research that you've uncovered there?
So like in terms of that, like the one kind of sentence that's like coming to me is that we still don't know enough in order to be able to say, okay, at this phase of your cycle, you are guaranteed to feel X, Y, and Z, and therefore like this method of training is appropriate. We're still very much on the level of, and I think as researchers, we potentially tried to like skip a few levels. So now we're like coming back and we're like, okay, let's go back to the basics. We're still very much on the level of, this is what you might feel and this is how you could train. So if you're not tracking individually as an athlete, whether you're like team sport, whether you're an individual athlete, kind of doing yourself a disservice. Even as basic as like monitoring health. Like, we all forget that the menstrual cycle is a marker of health. So if you're not getting one, that could be a red flag. So if, you know, you only feel comfortable or confident having a conversation with, like for me, I was an S&C coach with multiple girls teams. So they would come to me and they would have this conversation with me. Technically, like, it's out of my jurisdiction, not my scope of practice. But like, if I can preempt that conversation and maybe have some resources in play, in the sense that, okay, well, like, would you like me to have a conversation with like the team doctor, or this is how you could potentially manage this, then we're not closing that door, we're not closing off that conversation. So I know I've kind of gone around about your question there, but we can't say that the menstrual cycle directly affects X, Y, and Z just yet. So we can't give training protocols. So that's why it's very much individual, track your cycle and monitor as you see fit. And it's not the answer, believe me, it's not the answer that I want to give, and it's not the answer that our female athletes like want to hear. But like, bear with us, because like the research is evolving.
So I guess there's potentially, what you're establishing is there might be some markers that indicate certain things as opposed to specific phases. So if you feel a certain way, that this is the way that you should train, as opposed to that it's blocked off.
Yes.
Particularly in relation
so like
to
a lot of your tracking apps, and like a lot of menstrual cycle researchers will kind of tell you, not that we're against them, like I use a tracking app for my own menstrual cycle, but what we're against, I suppose, is some of them have like come out and said, you know, in your ovulation phase, you should do X, Y, and Z. You shouldn't train this, this, and this. Yeah. Whereas like we can't say that yet. We've no idea. And it also goes back to that sense of, what if you are just naturally menstruating as opposed to eumenoric? What if you're not getting, what if you're not ovulating? So like we're just not there yet.
Yeah. We're delighted to be working with Active Iron for season 2 of the Period panel. I myself have been taking their supplements for over a year and have had a really positive experience. One of the best things about Active Iron is the fact that it's so gentle on the stomach. So now let's dive back into the Period panel. I suppose I probably should have asked this question sooner, but I suppose the natural menstruation or the bleed that you're talking about, is that for people that are on the pill, or what is the difference between, or I know you've mentioned ovulation, but why wouldn't some people be ovulating, I guess?
So people who are on the pill, that's a withdrawal bleed.
Okay.
So like, I've definitely heard conversations with friends, like, you know, I get my period, blah blah blah, but I'm on the pill, and it's like, okay,
it's not a period.
Let's debunk that myth.
Yeah.
So that's just like that's your withdrawal bleed.
Okay.
Like for multiple health reasons, you may not ovulate.
Okay.
Again, like that's a little bit out of my scope. So
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I'll always be honest in the sense that I
So it's
don't
something
have
that's
an
probably
answer.
not even common knowledge
Yeah,
to people if
yeah.
they are ovulating or they're not ovulating.
Yeah.
So that's something then that they actually potentially need to check with their doctor, as
Yeah.
you said, to get those
Yeah.
urine samples to know.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, no, I wouldn't have thought, I suppose, anything of it. I would have just assumed
that's what you
that
learn, like in biology and leaving stage,
Yeah,
is
yeah.
that your cycle is 28 days, you ovulate in the middle, you bleed from 1 to 5.
Yeah, yeah.
But like,
That might not
we're
actually
so
be the
far
case.
from that now.
Interesting. And in terms of, I suppose, the stage that you're at now, like you've done a couple of presentations and you've, I suppose, been speaking to a range of different people. What is the kind of feedback that you've been receiving so far?
Like it's been really positive, especially within weight class sports. And I feel like a lot of weight class athletes, you know, it has been a taboo everywhere, but like specifically in weight class sports, and in the sense that, you know, we're like so highly strung and caught up in like what our body weight is and when it is. So now recognizing that, okay, well, even with all your hard work and effort, your body weight might just be your body weight based off your cycle phase.
Yeah, yeah.
So like there's been a lot of positives come out of it in that sense. Like
Educating people that things
yeah.
actually will fluctuate. I suppose it's maybe talked about generally, but to make sure that people actually really get an understanding themselves, the tracking is essential.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if that's the one piece of advice I could give, it would be track your cycle. But yeah, no, it has been quite positive. Like, and really opening up that conversation. Like people will message me, chat to me, about like the menstrual cycle or about, you know, how their training might vary. And, you know, to me, like I'm in a privileged position in that, oh wow, well, like you sought, I suppose, not even my advice, but like my ears. You wanted me to listen to your story on the menstrual cycle because you feel like I might be able to offer you something. So like, you know, I, for 1 second, like do not take advantage of like the privileged position that I'm in with these athletes and how it can, I suppose, develop another layer to our relationship.
How have you kind of evolved your relationship with like your menstrual cycle and your period from maybe being a teenager into now being an adult and in participating in your sport?
I suppose like I grew up playing like team sports. So when I was playing like basketball and rugby, like it didn't faze me in the slightest. Like it didn't cost me a second thought. It was actually, and I keep going back to weight class sports, but it was actually only when I took up powerlifting, and my body weight would fluctuate. Like I've competed in like maybe 3 or 4 different weight classes. So it was only when I was competing in what used to be an under 72 kilo class, and I would kind of naturally walk around at like maybe 76, 77 kilos. So I was cutting into this class and basically ended up with infrequent menstruation. So to me, I was like, okay, well, you know, I'm only 21 now, but like, if this is what it's like now, what's it going to be like
in the future?
Long term? I was also someone who was like fairly regiment, in that like my cycle was regular. I knew when it was going to come. I knew it wouldn't really affect my training. Like I was quite lucky in that my symptoms were not very severe. But then as my body weight would fluctuate, my symptomology would change. And again, like that's just me and me as an individual. So I suppose like I've definitely come a long way in a sense that like I can now recognize, okay, well my, like, you know, even though you know it, it doesn't make it any easier yourself, but like I can now recognize, okay, my body weight might fluctuate. Like I was diagnosed with PMDD back in January. So like what that is, it's Premenstrual Dysphoric Disorder. Not really spoken about. We don't really know a whole lot about it. But essentially my GP just described it to me as a more severe form of PMS.
Okay.
So PMS times 10 was what he said to me. So I suppose how that came about for me and how I felt like I needed to go to my GP, say, like I was quite low energy, like quite up and down in terms of like my mood, more so than
previously.
Normal. Yeah. It was like eating into my training, it was eating into my everyday life, and like what it looked like for me was I'd have 2 weeks where I was like sky high, and then I'd have 2 weeks where I was like so low in terms of like mood, productivity, like my training, wanting to socialize. So like I was like, okay, this is not normal. So for me then, like I went to my GP and like have in the last kind of 4 to 5 months actually started to manage it. So like I'm coming back to what looks like a normal cycle for me now.
And is that something that you think maybe was impacted by being involved in the weight class sports, or it's just something that maybe evolved over time?
I think it's like so we don't know how it's brought on, but like if you look at like changes within my life, like it definitely came at a time where I was just starting into research. Again, I was going through different weight classes in powerlifting, so like other stresses in life essentially. So I can't sit here and like give a yes or no.
Yeah.
But
there's physical and mental stress maybe that have impacted it. Yeah. So in terms of your competition, I know back in June you were competing in, was it 5 competitions in a 10-month space? Talk to us a little bit like that. How did that go?
Yeah, so it just kind of fell that way. So like I've been powerlifting for 5 years now, and trained all through COVID. I was lucky enough to have a setup at home. And then as soon as all of the competitions started back up again, I actually fell and injured my shoulder when I was out testing an athlete one day. So it just kind of fell that when I came back very hard, and did 5 competitions in 10 months, which is like not the norm. I was going from comp prep to comp prep, so like it gives you very little time to actually like increase your baseline. So yeah, it's not something I would recommend. I did enjoy it, and it definitely got me back into the sport. It got me qualified refereeing, and like it got the hours of competing and experience under my belt essentially, but I would not do that again.
And I suppose with this, like, you know, it's an average of every 2 months. Like, would you have noticed like much of an impact on your menstrual cycle through this 10-month phase of 10 months, 5 competitions? Yeah.
I think if you look at like solely weight class, I'm very lucky in the sense that like my body weight doesn't fluctuate too much depending on my menstrual cycle phase. Maybe like 1 kilo on days like 2 to 5 of my cycle, so when I'm actually bleeding. And like, you know, I've developed this over time from tracking my cycle, tracking my body weight. So it never like directly affected competition because I was never in that phase of my cycle when I competed. That was an accident. I didn't like go looking for competitions at phases I thought were like the most optimal to compete. That was purely an accident. So like it never directly affected my competition day, but like I do definitely think it affected my training. And I suppose because I was going through that time where like I had 2 weeks that I was just completely drained, was like just about training, and then I had 2 weeks where I was like high in the sky. I do think that probably had an impact indirectly to my competition performance.
In terms of your training, you've got some, you know, really good, I suppose, content on social and like sharing a bit of an insight into your training. You had a quote up recently from Ian Benson: "Don't squat sad, squat mad." So tell us a little bit about what this means to you.
So for me, like to give a little bit of context, I suppose, behind that was I only moved to Urban Barbell and coaching under Ian back in August. So I was at like a point in my powerlifting career where I didn't really know if I wanted to continue. I didn't really know if the sport was for me anymore. And then the federation that I lift with basically announced that they were going to send athletes to University Worlds. And I thought, okay, this is my shot. So moved to Ian because I just knew that like this was the right person who was going to be in my corner, was going to have my back, and was going to get me where I needed to go. So started our training. Block training was going really well. I was on this massive like upward trajectory within my training, and this was the last session of the block, and I knew I had like a big AMRAP to do on squats. And basically the day before I had sent an email to be like, okay, is there any, I suppose, limitations for me doing University Worlds, and like what's it going to take me to qualify? So basically our federation got back to me and were like, you're too old. The cutoff point is 25. So naturally enough, I was quite disappointed and disheartened. So I got on the phone to Ian. He was like, okay, he's like, you're just going to sit with it for today. He's like, you have to feel how you feel. And tomorrow you're still going to come down to Limerick and you're going to train. And I was kind of going, yeah, whatever. Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Which is like the wrong attitude, but like that's how I felt in the time. So I came down the Saturday morning and like I'm like a very structured, very planned person. So immediately I was like, right, we need a new plan. And he's like, yeah, okay, but you're going to do your squats first and then we'll talk about a plan. So I was like, oh, what's the point? So eventually he talked me around and essentially was like, don't squat sad, squat mad. And like I ended up having an unbelievable day in training that day. And I suppose it just kind of taught me that like even on your bad days, like you're still decent at the sport and
Can
your
get
day will
results
come, like, yeah.
Absolutely. And I suppose then looking to, I suppose the athletic future, you've looking at a couple of competitions coming up in the new year. So I've actually kind of opted, I suppose, to make the change and move over to the newest powerlifting federation that's setting up in Ireland. So my coach Ian, Garben and Jay Farrant, they're involved in setting this up. I've just become a referee for the federation, and I suppose for me this competition is solely about like getting out and enjoying the sport again, because I feel like, I'm with such a fantastic crew now. Like I finally feel like I've found like my powerlifting home, say after 5 years. So I suppose just to get out in February and a new weight class, a new federation, and just see what I can do. Enjoy it.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thanks a million for taking the time to come in. We'll look forward to hearing about all the results from the studies, maybe catch up in a couple of years and see what you have to share with us then. But thanks a million.
Thanks for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Period Panel. Thanks for listening. Be sure to connect with Her Sport across all of the social media platforms, particularly on Instagram, because we'll be putting up a question box before we shoot every episode. Our episodes will be a combination of athletes and health experts, and we'll direct your question to the person that's best able to answer. We hope to see you again at the next episode of the Period Panel.